Hello, everyone, and welcome to our opening keynote fireside chat of the age of the digital builder. And we have two great speakers here for you today. So we've got Jason Gardner, who is CEO of Marketa, and Ian Johnson, who is Managing Director Europe of Marketa. Gentlemen, hello and good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
Excellent. So we're going to have a really good discussion about sort of the journey of Marketa, the age of the digital builder, and where we're going in the future. So Jason, I'm going to start with you. Marketa didn't start off as a payments processor. Can you give us a little bit more detail of the journey that you've taken into the processing space?
Sure, and thank you for having me. Company got started in 2010. In late 2009, I was eating sushi with a friend in San Francisco. We said, hey, you're a payment nerd, try to put a bunch of Groupon coupons on a card. And that essentially led me on a journey to build a better card. And in 2010, was trying to understand how to go solve that problem. I had built and sold another payments company in late 2007 and knew that I needed to go build a platform to go and do this. I knew nothing about building an issuing processing system. So I talked to a bunch of friends and advisors, and it led me on a journey to start from building an issuing processing system from scratch. And to start, we felt that we had to build our own loyalty card. It was called the Marketa card. And then soon after that, we opened up the platform to Facebook. And Facebook started building at the time what's called the Facebook card. Allowed you to receive 100 gifts from 100 friends at 100 different merchants. And we had created a technology which originally solved the many Groupon coupons on a card. And we actually fell in love working with their engineers. We had exposed our API to them. That was always the plan, to open up our platform to the world. Got eBay up and running, and then late 2014 opened up the platform and quickly kind of closed down the loyalty card, which at the time was really focused on groceries. And 2015 began to have these builders build on top of our platform, and we found product market fit and clearly knew where we wanted to go in the future.
Interesting. Yeah, that's that founder journey. It's always interesting to hear. So, I mean, all throughout today at FTT Digital Builder, we're going to be talking a lot about toolkits and APIs. So my next question for you, Jason, really is, when was that sort of defining moment that motivated you to open up the Marketa APIs and the documentation?
Well, in the early days, so we knew we wanted to open the platform up. But if we remember back in 2010, I mean, fintech wasn't even a word. The idea of open platforms or APIs, I would be at conferences in the early days and I would have to actually say application program interface and define it. So people really understood what platforms were, and the thought of these digital builders going out and building their own products, arranging APIs in a way that created a very specific experience, whether it was a commercial experience or a consumer experience, was pretty unique. We decided we were going to open up the platform really in the early days when we were working with Facebook, and we decided that we actually liked a lot more being infrastructure, being the engine room of a ship versus building products for consumers. And I remember it was early 2014, we were meeting with a prospect who is still a customer of ours. We were meeting with their CTO, and he was explaining to us what he wanted to accomplish with a platform. And that was sort of the first feeling I had of product market fit, and knew that we were headed in the right direction of open the Marketa platform up, so that that engineers and developers or technical product managers or visionary entrepreneurs could build on top of the platform. Product market fit is very much a feeling. It's kind of like being struck by lightning, and you realize, like, okay, I have a very clear vision over the next, say, 3 to 5 years of what we want to build, not the specific features and functions, but how you want to interact with customers, not only in the US, but around the world. And it's actually a great feeling.
Interesting. So great. So Ian, I'm going to move on to you. And I mean, I'm glad Jason sort of talked about that evolution of when people started knowing about APIs, open APIs and platforms in the financial services space, and how that sort of evolved over the past 10 years. So for you, Ian, from a cultural perspective, having your tech open for the ecosystem to see, including your competitors, how has that shaped your mindset?
My experience from a Marketa point of view is it really drives people to try to deliver the very best technology you can, because it's out there in public domain. From a Marketa point of view, we don't stage gate anybody to get access to our API and sandbox. You go to the website, give us an email address, we build you a private sandbox whilst you're on the page, and you can start building, which is a fantastic tool. But you have to be driven to make sure that you are continuing to make sure that it's up to date, the documentation is really accurate, and people are really proud to have our platform out there. But this comes with a sizable investment in time and effort to make sure that what you're putting out there is something that developers and engineers really want to work with, because they are the most critical of voices. Even if you put your technology out there free and open, they still expect it to work and do the things it needs to. So I think it drives a real quest for perfection at Marketa, which I really like. I'm old enough, unfortunately, to have been in payments for over 20 years, and to be at a company where we are so proud of the technology that we put it out in the open is a very significant change for me. I'm used to the days of trawling around companies with big PowerPoint presentations, boring people senseless, trying to convince them that tech works. And I remember one of the very first meetings I ever went to at Marketa was with a French company. There was a commercial officer was there, along with two engineers who did what engineers do. They came into the room, said hello, opened their laptops, and then started to tap away. I thought, this is really quite ignorant and rude, but never mind, we'll carry on. And Chief Commercial Officer and I had a conversation, and then one of the engineers just kind of put his thumb up like that to the Chief Commercial Officer, and the Chief Commercial Officer said, oh, they've just been testing your APIs in the sandbox, and he said it's all good, it does what it says. And this was like a different world to me. I'd just been to a meeting where the client has been able to use the tech and give a thumbs up, and it just changes the dynamic of the conversations with organizations, that you are not trying to prove that your tech works with words. You're allowing people, it's a show not tell mentality. And as I say, that's the huge positive. But you have to really be on your game and make the investments needed to make sure that what you put out there is the very best that it can be.
That's really interesting. It's almost like if you owned a bakery and asked people to buy your cupcakes without letting them taste them. So it's a whole new.
Or even see them.
Yeah,
you can't get to see. You don't get to see the cupcake until you sign a 7-year agreement. It's going to cost you £10 million. So.
Oh my Lord! Yes, the old days. So everyone here watching, what all of our delegates today at FTT Digital Builder know that we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the Digital Builder. And so to start off our event, of course, we're talking to the man who coined the term Digital Builder, Jason, CEO of Marketa. So Jason, can you explain what you mean by that? What do you mean by Digital Builder?
So everything is moving to digital platforms or open platforms. That's where the world is headed. And I think, certainly over 2020, everything is moving away from cash. When my mom, who has an Android phone, is paying with her phone at the point of sale, we're thinking really differently. She used cash and card. She didn't really understand how to dip her card when the chip was put on it here in the US. And now you see where there's whole cultural shifts to understanding whether it's Apple Pay or Google Pay or Samsung Pay, and then open platforms. They have really ushered in these digital builders who are the engineers or developers or technical product managers or visionary entrepreneurs. And they don't have to necessarily be two women in a garage. They can be in a whole host of companies, whether it's 160-year-old banks like Goldman Sachs, or they can be Series A venture-backed startups. The thinking around what products will look like in the future or how they interact has all been really ushered in quickly around COVID. I mean, we think about whether it's social, whether we're on an interface talking with each other, we're not seeing each other as we usually would in person, which I think many of us are very much looking forward to it at some point. I haven't seen Ian in person in probably, 14 months or something like that. I very much look forward to that. And traveling again. So we've seen where everything in our purview is now digital, and the ability to build products that service constituencies around the world. And it could be commercial use cases or consumer use cases. It can be something that supports their core business or is their core business. In every city, town, country, and continent, we've really changed, and we've seen a lot of new things happen in the past 12 months. I mean, look at crypto taking off like a rocket. That's a digital currency. We see where Visa and MasterCard are getting into crypto settlement with USDC, new areas popping up around the world in regards to how digital currencies are moving. Cash is decreasing rapidly around the world, the use of it, and more moving to mobile phones. So we've seen just a massive shift over the last 12 months, and we're going to see that certainly continue.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I can't imagine what this pandemic would have been like 20 years ago. It would have been a very different set of circumstances we're dealing with. So, Ian, I'm going to move on to you. I mean, how have development cycles sort of changed in terms of speed of new features over the past 5 years?
Well, everything's got a whole heap faster, which in many respects is great. I think we went through an interesting phase with the fintech probably 2 years ago, where there was a seemingly nonsensical race to have the most features released, and less focus placed on the value of those features, which I'm glad to see that we are coming out of that phase. And there's more focus from the fintechs to race to see who releases the most features, but who delivers the most value. I think if you look back, really, it's in financial services, the fact that we started to use so many apps in so many different walks of life, and we got used to downloading an app and then maybe even 2 or 3 days later getting an update on our phone. Because somebody had seen that something wasn't working, or they'd got a new feature they wanted to release. So we got used to this outside of financial services. So we're in a situation now where people are not really hibernating their products away. They want to get them out there, getting them in the hands of consumers and corporates and SMEs, and they want that real-time feedback about how, what is working, what isn't. And they want to be able to seize market opportunity when it exists, which is all incredibly positive. I want to echo something that Jason mentioned earlier about digital builders being everywhere. The fintech industry has this habit of talking about not only the death of cash, which is one of our favorites, but we also talk about the fact that fintech is going to kill the traditional banks, and it's really not. I think one thing that we're really sure of from our conversations with those banks is there's an awful lot of work going on behind the scenes with the digital builders in those banks, where they're huge resources, incredibly talented people. It just takes them, many, many months and many decision committees before the first line of code is even written, which is completely different to the fintech space, where people can release an app in a matter of days. It's out there and they start to get feedback. But this is happening. So it's not the development timeframes per se in traditional banks that are the issue. It's the fact that culturally they have to spend a lot of time before they get to actually start to release code. So obviously everything's got a whole heap faster. We've pleasingly got out of the cycle of just releasing features for the sake of it. And I really like the fact that people are being much more considered about what to give to us as consumers in particular to help our financial life. I mean, that's ultimately the aim, as I see from the newer entrants, are more focused on how can they help us manage our finances better, which is ultimately all the better, whether that's from a traditional bank or from a fintech. I don't think a consumer really cares. Ultimately, they just want great technology that helps them manage their finances.
So I'm glad that both of you talked about, digital builders being everywhere. And of course, we know fintech, financial services, technology, innovation is a global industry. And so my next question, I really want to get views from both of you. So I'll go back to, I'll start with Jason on this. Marketa has experience with both Europe and the United States, North America. Have you noticed any discernible differences with clients' needs or goals or objectives across the different geographies? So I'm going to go to Jason first for your comment on that.
Yes, age before beauty, right, Ian? Yeah, there is a big difference, and I think Ian certainly experienced this in the very early days. We thought that the platform and the things that we needed to get done were truly universal, and we found that actually the playbook for the US did not apply to the playbook for Europe. It's a fundamentally different culture, not only in the UK, but we found that actually every single solitary country is different. You feel that when you build a platform that it is, easily used through every country, but every country is different. Every culture is different. The needs of those cultures are different. The entrepreneurs are different. And most importantly is the regulatory environment and the technology that they need. Something like 3DS, which is very prevalent within Europe, is not necessarily prevalent here in the US. Open banking, APIs are very easily accessible from an open banking perspective. That's sort of the basis of APIs. Open banking is not something that is even talked about or readily available here within the US. It can vary by state, but mostly universally, the ability to open up and import data back and forth between financial institutions or the consumer having control over their financial data doesn't really exist here. So we've learned a lot over the years. Ian has done a tremendous job around making sure that we can take what we have here in the US and make sure that it's not only accessible within Europe, but really focusing on the regulatory environment, the countries we're working with, to make sure that all of the countries can access the platform in a way, and we're applying to the rules and regulations and technology needed in those specific areas. That's one thing we learned in the early days when we moved from even the US to Canada or the US to Europe, that the needs of the engineers are the same in regards to very well documented APIs and understanding the landscape of how to build technology and accessing the APIs and the playbooks and things that we need to help them with as far as shortening time to market. But what we have learned is that as you move from countries to continents, they are very fundamentally different in how they deal with the regulatory environment and the technologies they need to use, and how strong and lengthy that roadmap needs to be to make sure that you're not only empowering them to build the best products of their lives, but also that you're focusing on the regulatory environment in a way that is very, very specific, and being focused on what the future regulatory environment is going to look like to make sure that you're hard coding all of that into the platform.
Excellent. Yeah, I had an old boss who called it just because it works in Belgium thinking, to talk about whenever you move to different regions. So Ian, I'd love to hear your experience, your side of the story to what Jason spelled out about the differences between sort of the US and UK European market.
Yeah, I would say that whenever you go to a new region or to a new country, you need to be prepared to learn a whole heap of new things that you can't anticipate. I think that Marketa, we did a great job of trying to anticipate as much as we could. We didn't and don't have a team who had any degree of arrogance that you can see from there's some organisations where they firmly believe that not only should the tech work in each country they go to, but if it doesn't, it's because the other countries are wrong and they're right. We don't have that mentality at Marketa. That wasn't the mentality, but ultimately you learn things when you're on the ground. So Jason talked about the regulatory environment. The regulatory environment in Europe has been incredibly helpful. It might drive many of us crazy when it seems that it's non-stop. There's always PSD 1, 2, 3, who knows where that stops for the numbering cycle. But these regulations have really driven a lot of innovation, and particularly have allowed organizations to expand across the entire region under broadly the same conditions and regulations. Now, as you know, each country can apply slight differences to what's supposed to be standards, but that's part of the enjoyment of the game. But the biggest learning, I would say, is that if you think about the Visa and MasterCard networks, there's this huge interconnection of banks and merchants. They have built truly global networks. But each individual merchant can behave slightly differently from the next one. And there are standards and specifications of how merchants should behave, but they don't all adhere to them. So you go to a new country, you think that you know what to expect for a certain transaction type, a certain purchase type, and then you get presented with a bunch of data from Visa or MasterCard, and you go, what on earth are we supposed to do with that? That's not supposed to be how it works. And the thing about an issuer processor, which I've learned, but I'm not sure the entire industry realizes, that even if you're not the party that's not processing the data the way it's supposed to, so let's say it starts at the merchant and gets passed through by the acquirer, the only logical place for somebody to fix that issue so the transaction can be processed is the issuer processor. Because you can't track back to a merchant in Belgium and say, excuse me, Mr. Merchant, that you didn't quite have that data in the right field, or it's the wrong value, would you mind fixing it? You have to fix it so the transaction goes through, which is why one of the things that I'm most proud of about Marketa is everybody talks about modern platform, built from the ground up, open APIs, amazing founder, even better managing director of Europe. But the things that you can't forget is the fundamentals. That being a global issuer processor means, firstly, you have to be able to keep the lights on, and secondly, you have to be able to handle everything that gets thrown at you by this huge network of interconnected banks and merchants. So that's the thing that each time we go into a new country and region, we're eyes wide open. And it's not a question of will something be different? The question is what will be different in this new country?
No, I agree. I think a lot of people think they understand payments, but they don't understand the iceberg that is underneath the surface whenever you get into dealing with payments the way they work internationally. So moving on to my next question. I mean, whenever, when you hear a term like digital builder, the image that comes to mind is, agile, nimble, maybe a small new fintech entrant. But Marketa has started working with more, larger financial institutions. And as we mentioned before, the traditional banks, this ecosystem, aren't going away. They're still part of a customer journey, and they're still part of the financial services ecosystem. Jason, I wanted to go back to you. I mean, how can large financial institutions better align their positions to the digital world that consumers are in today?
Well, the large FIs are becoming more nimble. We've announced JP Morgan Chase has adopted our technology, tokenization as a service. We've announced that Goldman Sachs Marcus is using our platform to build their next generation debit card. I mean, Goldman Sachs is a 160-year-old bank looking to disrupt banking. JP Morgan Chase didn't have the ability to instantly issue a card into Apple Pay or Google Pay or Samsung Pay. But now, using our technology, they have the ability to have a consumer or a business sign up for a card and have that card, within seconds dropped into a wallet such as Apple Pay or Google Pay or Samsung Pay and begin using it at the point of sale. I think we see this big shift moving towards digital, and banks, even though there is your thinking is, their predisposition is to remain on old technology or legacy platforms, but that's simply not true. If you talk to large FIs, they are really thinking about is how do we move everything to the cloud? How do we lower total cost of ownership within our business? How do we create better experiences for our businesses or our consumers who are on our platform? There are many different technologies that the consumer is going to use, and the banking relationship is the one they use on a very regular basis. I mean, if you think about the relationship in a business, like when you open up, your business or thinking about the first thing you do is actually set up a bank account. And on average, you're going to keep that bank account for 17 years. As a consumer, I remember, my dad taking me to the bank and, depositing $20 in the bank. And, I had a little savings book. I did the same thing with my kids. When, they were old enough to have their own bank account, I walked into the bank and had them sign up. This is a very, at least in my family, something that was traditional. And they're going to have that same bank account for a very, very long time. So the large FIs have to be able to adapt. They have to be able to move in the digital age because they're being disrupted by, the new fintech startups, whether it's, a Revolut in Europe or a Cash App in the United States. They're attracting a whole new generation of people who want to begin to use, they're really kind of digital first technologies. So we're definitely seeing where the large FIs, are thinking, albeit they are traditional financial services businesses, they're really thinking how can they transform in this sort of new digital world. And they obviously want to use open platforms to go and do that because they can arrange the APIs in a way to create a very specific consumer experience because they know what their constituency wants and they can deliver to them.
Yeah, very interesting. I have to apologize. My next question is going to concern COVID, which is the topic that is brought up in almost every conversation these days, and hopefully we will look back at this time and be happy we're not answering any more questions about COVID. So I'm going to stay with Jason and then move on to Ian for this question. What have been kind of your personal learnings from the global pandemic in relation to running a payments company? So Jason, I'll start with you.
I love eating dinner with my family overnight. When you're building a company, you're constantly on the road. You're commuting back and forth to the office, and your family is, my wife and my two kids. They know Dad works and he travels a lot, and I didn't realize how not traveling. How not commuting to the office. I commute to my office is 15 seconds from my bedroom to a spare bedroom where everything has been set up. My wife is a psychotherapist. Her office is in the next room, and she sees all her patients over Zoom. And we dinner together. We spend a lot more time together. I think in one thing, COVID, and there has been obviously a lot of suffering around the world. Families have become closer. They've been able to spend a lot of time with each other. My daughter's turning 13. My son is 19. Being able to be in one place at one time and not have, you obviously have the work and sort of the things that are going on outside of the home, but spending time with each other has been really, really great. I've been married to my wife for 21 years. We decided recently we're gonna continue that because we just love spending time with each other. So that part of it has been great. You also have the business side of it in building Marketa. I think we've all become very, very focused, not having to spend time traveling. I mean, one thing I do miss a lot is spending time with Ian in person, or traveling to Europe, or visiting with customers, or walking around the office and having those serendipitous moments where you're spending time with somebody and through a conversation, you maybe grew up in the same place, or know the same people, or have had the same experiences. I actually really look forward to getting back and doing that. And I would say third is when we went to shelter in place, which was, I believe, March 15th of last year, Marketas felt like a small company again. And I spent about 9 days writing down what the future of payments were going to look like. And we ended up actually adopting it as our corporate strategy. And a lot we have been doing has been in service to that. So my personal experience and professional experience with Marketa has actually been great. I've really enjoyed myself. I enjoy this time, and I'm really looking forward when the office opens up to have that balance, both personal and professional, knowing full well that what's been going on outside. We have started Marketa Cares to focus on the community. We've raised money to feed, we've served over, I think, 3,500 to 4,000 meals in and around Oakland to help families that needed help. We came together as a company within our community, and we came together as individuals, and we've been really supporting each other. So it's been very interesting over the year, and I'm looking forward to see how we operate as a business when we go back to having the office, and making sure that everybody can balance that both personally and professionally.
Yeah, no, I think I know we are kind of the lucky group of people, but I like positive stories about what's come out of this global pandemic, and I think hopefully we will continue these new ways of working, work-life balance. I think it's a step in the right direction. So, Ian, how is the global pandemic kind of affected you at MD of Europe with running a payments company?
I would say that the biggest thing is to shift more and more of your focus to check in with the people on your team to see how they're doing, and to not assume that everybody's having the same lockdown experience that you're having, because they're not. People. I live in the middle of the countryside. It was during each lockdown. My wife and 2 kids have been able to get out. We've been able to go and walk, fantastic views, go on bike rides. But we have people who are in central London in 1-bedroom apartments with no garden. They're told not to go out. So I think first and foremost is understanding each and every person's individual situation. Not pretending that you care, but genuinely caring. And Marketa is, in my opinion, like no other business from that point of view. That comes right from the very top in terms of things like giving people one FTO day off a month. At one point during lockdown, people were getting kind of every other Friday off, which is something the executive team kind of put forward, which is a huge help to people. A real level of flexible working. So, sometimes you have to, in this environment, yes, you can definitely focus. It's a great time to focus, but it's also easy for people to slip into the thing where, because they're not commuting, they go straight into their office if they have one, or they go to their breakfast table and they start working, and before you know it, they've been sat there for 12 hours and they haven't seen daylight, and when there is daylight, obviously. And it's about, gently coaxing people to make sure they don't let that happen. So that you're helping them. Sometimes I've had to insist that some people, log off because they're so committed to the work that they do. But that it's just one of those things that nobody can run forever. I think from a less on the people side, but from a pure business point of view, what's been interesting is that in Europe, we're serving 31 different unique countries. And as you know, those countries have gone in and out of lockdown at very different stages, had very different experiences. Let's take somewhere like Sweden, where there hasn't been a lockdown at all, where we have customers and businesses just carried on, to countries like kind of Czech Republic, where they've had significant lockdowns, Italy, Spain. So again, similar to the people thing, don't assume that everybody's experiencing the same thing, because they're not. So checking in with customers and understanding what they're experiencing, and listen to their experiences with their own businesses, and what are they doing, and what things have they found, and what things are helping to keep morale up and keep people going. But I've also enjoyed the human side. I mean, I've seen more pets, more wives, more boyfriends, partners, more semi-naked children, more demanding 2-year-olds than you ever would at the office. So, you feel as though you know everybody that you work with a lot more than you do necessarily in the office. And I think, having been somebody who's worked from home on and off for a number of businesses, there used to be a time when that just was frowned upon. Now, if you remember the BBC news reporter, when I think he was in Singapore or Hong Kong, this little kid came in, and he instantly turned around and he was really panicked and tried to get the kid to go out.
Yep.
And the whole thing went viral. That I don't see that happening, because people have just accepted the fact that we're in a situation where our family and work life are so intermingled that the days of people trying to distance themselves when you work from home from any noise or anybody from family, it's just not a reality. And I personally think that's been a great thing, because it just makes everything much more human.
Yep. No. Yeah. We've had dogs, cats, children on FTT events. They pop up now and again all the time. So yeah, it's very common. So we're getting close to the end of our discussion. So I'm gonna start with you for my next question, and here's going to be a fun one. I think a lot of people know that the past year has kind of accelerated a lot of innovation and progress in this space. So Ian, I'll start with you. What do you think is going to be the next big innovation in the card and payment space?
That's a huge question. I think I will steer away from many of the kind of things that people say. The thing that I'm most excited about is the whole principle of digital identification, and where that can take us in terms of just making accessibility to financial services a whole heap easier, and improving the whole transaction process. I mean, at the end of the day, a card number is nothing more than an identifier. That's all it ever has been. It's a way of identifying who you are at the bank that you bank with. And I think that there's a whole raft of new opportunity with the digital identification that kind of follows you around for the services that you purchase and you kind of consume. So it's not necessarily so much a product. I think it will become an underlying feature and factor of just how great companies work. And I come back to the fact that in our industry, we have a great tradition of constantly trying to find more and more ways of making things more seamless for consumers and SMEs and corporates. So whether that's opening a bank account, Jason just described an experience that was completely paper-based. Certainly remember doing exactly the same thing with my parents.
So did I.
So whether it's opening a bank account, getting a credit line that used to be from the same bank, it used to be in person, it used to be based on a monthly credit file that ultimately very often was not correct, and certainly didn't tell you very much about who you are as a person. So we've spent a lot of time and been really successful in improving those, but we will, the industry will keep going at those things until it gets even more seamless. And the same thing goes from the actual payment and purchase transaction perspective. So I think that the whole digital identification piece and how that will drive that innovation is the thing that I think is most exciting to see develop over the course of the next 5 years.
Excellent. So Jason, I'm going to go over to you now. What do you think is going to be the next big innovation in the cards and payment space?
Well, I agree with Ian that digital identities is going to be key. I mean, we still experience extraordinary amounts of fraud around the world. So being able to lock that down is, I think, really important to the future. I'm actually really excited about stablecoins. USDC, which now Visa and MasterCard support. This really kind of goes into more of global money movement. Like, how can money move around the world in a different way? And then all of the data that or the payload that's associated with that. That helps on digital identities. It helps as far as how that money is sent and accepted. It's something that I've been excited about for some time. You marry that with blockchains, and the ledgerability of that is very, very unique. And then obviously couple that with digital identities. It's a really interesting way to combat fraud. And I'm not talking about like Bitcoin or Ethereum and the investment thesis around that. I'm really specifically talking about the movement of money in its digital form. And something that's more widely accepted. It's something I've been thinking about and talking about for a long time. And I think we're finally beginning to see some acceptance around it, not only on a state level here in the US, but countries around the world are now thinking about how they can use digital currencies tied with, blockchain ledgers and then the digital identities associated with that. I find it really fascinating, and it's exciting for me to finally see this coming to fruition.
Excellent. Well, I mean, I think this has been a really great discussion, and has really sort of set the stage for a lot more conversations that we're going to be having at FTT Digital Builder throughout the day. So I'm going to have my final question be a real CEO question. So it's going back to you, Jason. Fast forward 5 years from now, where is Marketa in the payments ecosystem?
Well, I won't give away too many of our secrets. Part of our strategy is 3 to 5 years out. We have a lot of things to do ahead of us that we're pretty excited about. But really, I'll go back to digital currencies. I think the ability to create these payloads of not only the monetary value, but all of the data that's wrapped around them is pretty significant. And we very much think about that in the context of AWS, compute, storage, and databases. And we know that this is where the world is going. We talked about large FIs. We talked about 2 women in a garage who are building the next could be the next digital bank. The ability to leverage all of this in the cloud and marrying that with a lot of the future going on with obviously new technologies like stablecoin is really, really exciting. So I feel like we're just scratching the surface. We're now over 11 years or over 10 years of building Marketa. And I think many of us are at sort of the beginning of what's coming next in regards to building digitally.
Excellent. Wonderful. Gentlemen, thank you so much for kicking off FTT Digital Builder. We're going to have lots of great discussions throughout the day. And I thank you very much, Jason and Ian.
Excellent. Thank you for having us.